Life is full of choices, yeah? Yeah. Life is full of choices, right? Aren't you glad you don't have to make some of those? But life is full of choices. In fact, if you really think about it, a lot of our life, our quality of life, the way our life is played out, the way our life just kind of runs day to day, has a lot to do with the choices that we make. And I'm fascinated by the process and how we make those choices. Now, there are times when the choices that we have don't seem like choices or good choices at all, like that, all right? Those don't even seem like choices. But I am interested in how we go about making choices. Okay, so there's an example early on in Scripture where I think a young man makes a couple of choices that really impact his life and the life of others. And I would just kind of take a short look this morning, if we can, on how he went about making the choices that he made. So if you'd like to turn to the book of Genesis, chapter 4, you are already very familiar with this story. Genesis chapter 4. And I'll be reading from the ESV this morning. I hope that doesn't mess you up, but we'll have the scriptures on the screen. So Genesis chapter 4 tells us that Adam and Eve had a son, and they named him Cain. And then they had another son, they named him Abel. And verse 3 says, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. See, because Cain was a farmer and Abel was a shepherd. So they both brought an offering. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry and his face fell. Okay, we're going to stop there for a few minutes. And so what I would like to do is just simply reverse engineer some decisions that Cain made. Now, we know the end of the story. We know that when they were out in the field, Cain and his brother, Cain decided to take his brother's life. We know how the story ends. I'm interested in how he got to that point. So if we kind of reverse engineer the murder that took place between Cain and Abel, and we kind of look backwards, and if we ask some questions along the way, we say, okay, well, why did Cain kill his brother Abel? And we know from what we just read that Cain was angry. We know that. And so in his anger, he made a choice to take his brother's life. Have you ever considered why Cain was angry? It seems obvious, but I think there's a couple of choices. Why was Cain angry? Was he angry at Abel? Was he mad because Abel gave a better sacrifice than him and outdid him? Maybe he thought Abel should have lowered his standards a little bit to match his and he wouldn't have felt so bad. So was he mad at Abel for what Abel did? Was he mad at God because God did not accept his sacrifice? Maybe he felt like God should have accepted his sacrifice regardless of whether it was acceptable or not. Maybe he felt that way and he was mad at God because he felt like God should have taken it. Or maybe he was mad at himself. But maybe he was just mad because he knew he didn't live up to God's standard. For whatever reason, maybe they're all right. We know that Abel received the brunt of Cain's anger. I do not personally believe that he was actually angry with Abel. I believe he was probably mad at God and mad at himself a little bit. And just in his anger, he made a decision that really impacted Abel's life. And probably the lives of his parents too, because I doubt Adam and Eve were really happy about losing one of their sons. And so it was because of that anger that he made that decision. Well, why was he angry? Because God did not accept his offering. So maybe he blamed God a little bit. But how did he get to that point? How did he get to a place where God did not accept his offering? What was the first choice that he made? See, when we think about Cain and Abel and the choices that Cain made, we always go straight to the murder. Well, the big mistake that Cain made was he killed his brother. But we never think about the process of how he got there. His first choice that he made, the first choice in his life that really impacted his life long term, was he failed to give God an acceptable offering. That was a choice that he made. And that choice led him down a road that ended in Abel's death. You see, he had a choice of what to give God, whether to give God of the first fruits of what he had produced, what God had given him, or not. Okay, so you see the progression. We always go either to the anger or straight to the murder. We fail a lot of times to see what really started the whole process, and that is his failure to give God what God deserved. You with me so far? Okay, so don't miss where it all started. And I love this progression, because if we will really apply this to our lives, we will see that a lot of times we get into these deep emotional states, and we're not very well equipped to make decisions in deep emotional state. We're very vulnerable when we get really emotional. But he didn't just get angry for no reason. He got angry because of his choice that he made. Even if he felt like God should have accepted his offering the way it was, he still made a choice to give God a substandard offering. And that put him out of favor with God immediately. And because he was out of favor with God, he was experiencing the anger of emotion and probably some jealousy and some envy. And when he was in that vulnerable state emotionally, he was just really ready to make a really bad decision. Okay, we'll get back to that in just a moment. So I want to look at this conversation. This conversation between God and Cain fascinates me because it was in the midst of that emotional turmoil. It was in the midst of that anger that Cain still had some choices to make. And we a lot of times tend to blame our emotions or use our emotions to make decisions in life that are bad or that are outside of God's will, and we use our emotional state to blame or claim responsibility for or push responsibility away. And so have you ever said this statement in response to why you did something? Because I was mad. Have you ever used that as a reason for doing something you know you should not have done? If we're honest, every one of us would probably have to raise our hands. Okay, if it's not because I was mad, how about, well, because I was sad? Or because I was lonely? Or because I was anxious? Or because I was happy? Or because I was whatever, fill in the blank. Because this person said this, so I did this. And we blame our emotional states a lot of times for decisions that we make. And Cain was in a very vulnerable place when he had this conversation with God. Very vulnerable, because God knew what he was about to do. He knew it. But this conversation with God is often interpreted to mean that God is referencing what Cain is about to do. I'm gonna try to interpret it for you to explain that God is offering Cain an opportunity to go back and fix what he started wrong. Okay, so let's take a look at that. That is in verse 6. Keep in mind, this is when Cain is in this emotional state of anger that just got him all messed up. Okay, keep in mind that his face is fallen. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted?" That's a rhetorical question. God is basically saying, if you do what is right, you will be accepted. That's what he's saying. It's a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious. If you do well, if you do what is right, in my eyes, if you do what is acceptable, you will be accepted. He is already in a state of not being accepted when God says this. He is already in a state where he's out of favor with God because of his bad offering, because of his unacceptable offering. He's in a state of we'll call it separation, but he is not in favor with God. He has not been accepted by God. So God is saying, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? I believe he is pointing back to his offering. Look, he's giving him a chance. You still have a choice. Even in your emotional turmoil and this anger and this jealousy and probably envy that you are experiencing, you are still not without a choice to make. And we do that so often. We get into these emotional states and we act like we don't have any more choices, as if we're somehow not in control of our bodies and not in control of our minds and not in control of our choices and our decisions because we are, fill in the blank, mad or lonely or whatever it is for you. And so God, I believe God, in his foreknowledge, he knows what Cain's about to do, but I believe he is presenting to Cain an opportunity to go back and fix what he failed to do at the very beginning. He has a choice. I am confident that if at this moment Cain goes back and gives to God what God deserves, then all is right. He will be accepted by God, and his offering will be accepted by God. That is God's grace applied to Cain right there. He is giving him a choice. wants him to recognize that he still has a choice, even in this state of emotions that he is in. He continues, and if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you. Another way of saying that is its desire is against you. It wants to get at you. It wants to devour. It wants to destroy. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. You see the choices? You see the choices that are available to Cain right now. I believe he still has an opportunity to go back and fix what he didn't get right from the very beginning that will put him back in favor with God. And he would probably not be angry, and his face would probably not be downcast. God has given him an opportunity to bring his face back up and his emotions back up to where they need to be. Because if you are out of favor with God, you are probably going to experience some negative emotions. And if you are experiencing negative emotions, especially in your relationship with God, you are primed and ready for sin. You are in a state where you are more vulnerable a lot of times than you even realize or like to admit. It's that emotional vulnerability. And God describes sin as like this wild animal that's just hanging out outside the door and just crouching down and is just ready to pounce as soon as you open that door. As soon as you give it an opportunity, it is ready. And it wants to just destroy and devour your life. But God also lets Cain know that he can rule over it. He said, you must rule over it. It's ready. It's crouching down. It's ready to attack. If you open that door and you let it in, its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. But don't miss where Cain is in his life that makes him vulnerable to this sin. I do not necessarily believe that God is referencing his failure to give him an offering as sinful. He's saying, look, sin is almost there. It is ready to take over because of the choice that you made. And you are out of favor with me, and you are angry, you are about ready to do something that is going to impact your life and the lives of others in a major way. But he still had a choice. And so I would like for us this morning to simply recognize, especially the emotional places in our lives, that those are times, those are moments when we are extremely vulnerable. And if we allow our emotions to make decisions for us, or we make decisions based on our emotions, a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, those will be decisions that are not in God's will. But have you ever considered how you got to that emotional state? All right, I'm not saying this is the only path, but this is one, and I would just like for you to consider it. 3 things we can take from this conversation with Cain and how you can make good choices. Number 1, obviously you need to give God an acceptable offering. I know every time we say the word offering in church, everybody thinks about the plate that's going to come around in a little while. Okay, that's just a small portion of it. For us in a New Testament context, that's a small portion. You might want to take a look at that. Okay, if that's something you need to look at, you might want to, because if you are offering God something that is subpar or substandard to him and what he deserves, then it is very possible that could immediately take you out of favor with him simply because he won't accept something subpar. Especially if he knows that you have a choice and you're simply making a choice to offer him something subpar. That's the first choice that you're making, what you offer God. Nobody is forcing you one way or another. It is 100% your choice, just like it was Cain's. It was Cain's choice to offer God an unacceptable offering. Nobody was holding a pitchfork to his head saying, okay, so he did that with intention. We don't know why, other than maybe lack of faith. You know, in Hebrews chapter 11, Abel is commended for his faith in the offering that he gave. Said he gave it with faith. And so we might consider that maybe Cain didn't have enough faith to give an offering that was acceptable to God, that he lacked the faith or trust in God that he would be able to provide for him, even though he gave him his very best crops. And so that may be an area that you struggle. There definitely has to be faith attached to what you offer God, because you have to trust that God is going to take care of you. But I also want to expound it a little bit for in a New Testament context. What we offer, a New Testament offering, is much more than financial. right? Much more than money. It's much more than resources. Because our worship should be a daily lifestyle, right? When we should be offering. What do you offer God on Monday? What do you offer God on your Thursday morning? And what does your life look like? That is your offering. Is it acceptable to God? Okay? Take a look at that. Consider that. So number one, that is your choice. You choose what you offer God. And so in order to be accepted by God, in order to be in favor with God, right off the bat, you need to give God an acceptable offering. I'm not saying you're necessarily in a state of sin if you're not, but you are making yourself vulnerable. You with me? Okay, because I think what that did for Cain is it made him vulnerable. And so if you are out of favor with God, if you are offering him an offering that is not acceptable to him, you're probably going to experience some negative emotions. So in that state, you need to recognize that you're not in a good place to make decisions. And you need to make decisions based on truth, not emotions. Okay, God's word is not going to change no matter how you feel. Your emotions are going to go up and down. That's just the way the emotions are. God's word will not change. It will not change based on how you feel on a given day. We wish that were the case sometimes, but that's just not the case. I like that. I mean, that's something we need to appreciate. I'm glad God doesn't change. I'm glad his truth and his word does not change with the whims of human beings, because then it wouldn't be trustworthy. So God's word is true all the time, no matter how you feel. So you have to make decisions based on what God says, not on how you feel. And so there may be a time when you can consciously, you can intentionally, you can on purpose make a decision that goes against how you feel in the moment. It goes against your emotions, but you know is God's will. Those are really important moments in life, because had Cain done that, he wouldn't have killed his brother Abel. Keep in mind, even in his emotional state, he still had a choice to make. He could have rectified what he didn't get right at the very beginning, and he could have dealt with his emotions in a godly way, and he decided not to. That was a choice that Cain made. And we have the potential of making some of those same decisions in our lives. And number 3, consider others. This is a question, there's another rhetorical question I already know the answer to. Has your life ever been impacted negatively by the choice of another person? All right, so you know the flip side of that, right? I have to ask. Has anyone else ever received or been impacted negatively by a choice that you've made? All right, that was much more difficult to admit. And so Abel received the brunt of Cain's anger. Cain's decision impacted Abel in an eternal sense, took his life. Impacted Adam and Eve, I'm sure, extremely hard to see their siblings interact that way. And so we have to put ourselves aside at times and consider other people when we're making choices, that our choices do impact others. We wish we lived in a bubble, and so we can just do whatever we want and say whatever we want and behave any old way we want to, and it's not going to impact the lives of others. And sometimes we just do whatever we want to do, and it just impacts anybody. And sometimes we don't even care. You know why we don't care? Because of our emotions. It's because of our emotions that we don't care in that moment. We're just going to do whatever we want to do, and we're going to say whatever we want to say. If it impacts somebody negatively, maybe they'll get over it. And it's our emotions that drive that. But what got you to that emotional state? You with me? Okay, I want you to be able to track all the way so you can see how you get to an emotional state to where you'll just make any decision and really affect other people's lives in a negative way. So think about others before you make decisions. Think about your emotions before you make decisions. Okay, this will impact your everyday life. You have some choices to make today. You've already made choices. You made the choice to come here. I mean, just think, have you ever thought about how many choices you make on a given day? You made the decision to come here. You didn't have to. Nobody made you to come here. Unless you're maybe 10 years old. Mom and dad said, yeah, you have to go. That's okay. But you made a choice to be here today. You already made a choice to how you're going to worship. You have a choice to make, probably the biggest decision anybody will ever make. You have a choice on what to do with Jesus, how to handle the truth of him. And when you come to a knowledge of him and who he is, and recognize that and admit that and surrender to that, you have a choice on how you're going to live. He doesn't take your free will away. He just doesn't take your ability to choose. It's not gone. You still have to choose to follow every single day. In just a few minutes, we're gonna take communion. It is your choice how you handle that time in this service. Whether you handle that time with reverence and awe and really spend time in the presence of God and really consider your life and what his death and his sacrifice means for you. You have a choice during that time. Whether to just be flippant about it or whether to really, really dig in and appreciate what Jesus has done. And you have a choice to make when the offering plate is passed. It's worship. That is your financial offering. You have a choice to make on what that looks like. And you have a choice when we sing a couple more songs. You have a choice on how you're going to worship. You have a choice on how you approach the throne of God. These are choices that you are making. We spend most of every day making some kind of choice. And I would just want us to consider the choices that we're making and the places that we are making them from to make sure that we are offering God an acceptable sacrifice, that we are not allowing our emotions to control our decisions, and that we are considering others before we do what we're wanting to do. And so you have a choice to make today. Choose wisely.